Zabit Magomedsharipov. Holy shit is this guy.
Zabit Magomedsharipov, the biggest enigma in UFC history. At 28 years old, after winning all 6 of his fights within the company, he was ranked number 4 in the featherweight division. Only champion Max Holloway and contenders Volkanovski, Ortega, and Jose Aldo were ahead of him. A creative, dynamic, and unpredictable striker, backed by his incredible grappling skills developed since childhood in his homeland, no fighter brought what Zabit offered to the table. After his last victory against Calvin Kattar, the Russian seemed to be on the verge of a title shot. One more win and the title fight would be his. However, that November 9th, 2019 was the last time the protagonist of this story stepped into the UFC octagon. 3 years later, without fighting since then, Zabit announced his retirement from MMA at 31. With everything going for him to achieve the glory he had fought for over the years, a completely unmotivated Zabit said goodbye to the sport. Make sure to like and subscribe for more content. Born in Dagestan, a land of legends, in 1991, Zabit was always different from the rest. Although, of course, he practiced wrestling, a sport that's practically a religion in his homeland, he was also drawn to the art of kickboxing from a young age. In 2012, he made his MMA debut, and in those 5 years before entering the UFC, he had already shown flashes of what was to come in the biggest company in the world. The most impressive thing was that he made it look easy. So easy that you could imagine him fighting for dessert in the cafeteria and winning. A nightmare for any opponent who tried to challenge him in striking. But if anyone attempted to take him down for an advantage, Zabit showcased extraordinary takedown defense to keep the fight standing. Though, as you can see, many of his wins ended up coming via submission. He was like a buffet of combat techniques. If you didn't like the main course, he'd switch it up for another one. And both were equally painful. In September 2017, the moment he had worked so hard for arrived. The Russian had entered the company with a clear goal of becoming the world champion, and Mike Santiago would be his first opponent. In less than 10 seconds, Zabit threw 3 different types of kicks, a clear warning of what was to come, and proof that this Dagestani was unlike any other. So different it felt like he was playing Mortal Kombat in real life. Who the hell is this guy who in 5 minutes has racked up more highlights than half the UFC fighters in their entire career? Many fans must have wondered as they watched the Russian in action for the first time that day. As on many other occasions, Zabit, demonstrating his superiority in striking, finished with a submission. Sometimes I wonder if he mentally called the fight won before it ended, just so he could get back to training. Only 8 weeks after that debut, the Dagestani was back in action, this time against Brazilian Shimon Moraes, where once again he showcased incredible skills that the opponent could do little to counter. The most Russian side of Zabit came out in several moments of the fight with incredible takedowns. The result? Another victory, another highlight, and probably a poor rival wondering if he should have stayed in the gym that day. The UFC, impressed with this new star, sped things up to give him more visibility by placing him on numbered cards. At UFC 223, an event headlined by Khabib Nurmagomedov, Zabit would get his big chance to shine in front of a large audience for the first time, fighting on the main card. All of Zabit's fights are worth watching to be amazed at what he could do inside the octagon. But if we had to pick one of his 6 UFC fights to understand the phenomenon he was, it would undoubtedly be his fight at UFC 223. Like the passing of Halley's Comet, it appears once in an era, but leaves a brilliant and unforgettable trail. Zabit asked to face Yair Rodriguez after defeating Bosniak, but when Yair got injured, Brandon Davis stepped in on short notice. In that fight, Zabit showed his most Dagestani side with dominant grappling and a rarely seen submission, the Suloev stretch. A submission rarely seen in the UFC, it was the icing on the cake in a fight that once again highlighted the Russian's creativity and versatility, bringing him even closer to a title shot. With 4 consecutive wins and showing no signs of weakness, Zabit was increasingly on the radar of serious contenders in the division. The question on the minds of fans and experts was when he would get the chance to fight for the title, as his performances in the octagon made him deserving of a title shot. After that win, Zabit was finally matched up against a top-5 opponent, Calvin Kattar, a rising contender who represented a much more serious test. This fight, originally scheduled for 5 rounds, ended up being shortened to 3, something that many later criticized as Kattar seemed to be improving in the final minutes of the fight. Even so, Zabit once again showed his superiority in the first 2 rounds, dominating with his unpredictable striking and clinch control. Though Kattar finished the 3rd round strong, it was too late to overturn the decision. Zabit claimed victory by unanimous decision, improving his UFC record to 6 consecutive wins. It seemed that with this win, the title shot was just a matter of time. However, after this fight, Zabit disappeared from the spotlight. What seemed like a brief pause between fights turned into a prolonged silence. Speculation began to grow. Injuries? Contract issues? No one knew for sure what was happening with the Dagestani. Finally, in 2022, Zabit broke the silence by announcing his official retirement from the sport. He cited health issues and a loss of motivation as reasons for his decision. At 31 years old, Zabit left MMA without having reached the peak that seemed destined for him, leaving behind a legacy of unrealized potential and an enigma that, to this day, continues to spark debate among MMA fans. Could Zabit Magomedsharipov have been the greatest featherweight in history? It's a question that will likely never have a definitive answer, but what is certain is that his career, though short, left a profound mark on UFC history.